guys, welcome to another One Voice Live, where we talk about One Voice, what it is, and how it fits into the world of singing. I am your host, Alex Zeto, and today we are starting a three-part series called Dealing with Damage, and we're going to be exploring all things regarding vocal damage, everything from what are some signs that you might have vocal damage to what do you do if it turns out you do, and then how to prevent it. So joining me on this series for the next 3 weeks is creator of One Voice, Michael Maresca. Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Yes.
So today is part one, Michael, which is how do you know
Yeah.
you have damage? So we're going to be talking about signs of that.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be taking a bit of a backseat, and I'll pop up with any questions that I have or that I think our listeners might have. But I'm just going to kind of let you go.
Awesome. I'm so excited to talk about this. And I think this is such a, I think there's a lot of shame kind of around all of this, and a lot of people are like in the dark and quiet about like, oh, I shouldn't talk about, voice damage and if I have it. And there's so much shame, which is such a bummer because it keeps people from getting the help that they need or taking action soon. And because they don't take action soon enough, they sometimes end up in a worse position than they would have had they've gotten help that they needed beforehand. So, yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this. And I think there's a ton of questions and misinformation around this. And I think One Voice is going to bring a lot of, or looking at this information through a One Voice lens, or the One Voice lens, is going to bring a lot of clarity for a lot of people. And I can't wait to get into all that. So I know that we're going to get into that in different parts of this series. So I'm going to pace myself and not let myself get too excited. So just reel me in, Alex, if I jump ahead. But why don't we start? We're going to begin with talking about certain signs, things that you can detect. How do you know if you have voice damage? Well, let me start off by saying this. With your voice, there's not a whole lot of nerve endings, much like your tongue. Your tongue has a lot of nerve endings, tips of face, etc. You can feel a lot here because you have a lot of sensory, you have a lot of nerve endings here, which creates you have a high level of sensation. In your larynx and your vocal cords, you have very few to none in some places. And so it's very hard to feel certain things. So people say, well, will it hurt when I have voice damage? Not necessarily. So pain isn't always a good flag, if you will. It isn't a good a tell indicator. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for of voice damage. And so I want to talk about a few things that are kind of things to be aware of, and then I want to talk about each of them individually and kind of what to look for within them. The first is no sound. If you find that you are making no sound, that is one thing to look out for. The next is hard to sing what you used to be able to sing. If you're finding that it's hard to sing songs that used to be very easy for you to sing, or suddenly singing has just become more difficult overall, that's another thing to pay close attention to. If you're having random voice cracks, now I'm speaking to post-pubescent males. If you were assigned male at birth, and I'm talking what happens to you after that puberty phase. And then raspiness, hoarseness. If you're finding that you've got a lot of air and it's going like this often, that can be a tell. Loss of range sometimes can be a tell for that. Loss of volume. So I want to talk about these 6 things first and break them down. So let's start with no sound. No sound can occur for many reasons. What happens is that when we create sound, what's happening is our vocal cords are shutting over our windpipe, and then air is being pressed through them. They release a puff of air and they slap back together. Now, I remember the first time I saw this totally did not make sense to me. So I remember telling people, I was like, yeah, your vocal cords, they do this. And like, if anyone's vocal cords did that, it'd be terrifying. There'd be inside of your larynx, and that's bad. So the vocal cords don't do this. What's happening is when people show you this and they peel their hands apart and do this, what they're showing you is a view as if you took, I'm going to get a little graphic for a moment, but if you took my head, here's my larynx right here, and you made an incision with a saw, this is horrible, all the way down my body sideways, okay? Now we've cut the larynx in half, so we're going to take the front part of the larynx off. Now you're looking at my vocal cords here and what are called my false folds here. Epiglottis will be a little taller, but right here is where my vocal cords are. And what they do is they shut horizontally over the windpipe. The air is coming up here, and then they shut over the windpipe to resist the air. If you want to feel your vocal cords, you can try this when I say huh, huh, at home. Try that at home. Yeah, and you'll feel that huh. What's happening is your vocal cords are actually shutting and stopping the airflow. So over your windpipe, they're shutting completely, and now no air can pass through. Okay, so this is how, on a closer view of this is how we make sound. We resist that airflow, but only so much that if we zoom in really close, this is like a 100 time or like 200 times zoom here on my vocal cords. And what you're seeing right now is you're looking at my vocal folds from a split front view, okay? That means that you've cut this off and you've opened this up. Now you're looking at me directly this way, half of my vocal cord, yeah? And so what you're seeing is the thickness of the vocal fold here, okay? That connects to the front of my larynx and also to the back. And what you're about to see is the air that's going to come up from the lungs is going to come up, and what it's going to slowly do is it's going to peel apart the vocal cords. Once it peels apart the vocal cords enough, they release a puff of air, right? And when that air is released, now a bit of pressure has been released, and they snap back together. So what happens is when you make sound, people say this all the time. They're like, you don't want to slam your vocal cords together. Don't do that. Well, in reality, every time you make sound, that's exactly what you're doing, because it's how you make sound. If you've ever bubbled your lips before, this is identical to what your vocal cords do when you produce sound. So you can try this at home. Take your lips. I'm sure a lot of you are used to this. You've probably done lip trills, tongue trills. They sound like this. Now you notice that I'm actually making a sound, and the reality is, it's just like Alex did that. Alex, could you do that again? Boo, boo, except an octaves below me where I'm at right now. She's actually making pitch. It's just so slow that it's such a low frequency that it's hard for us to hear. But because her vocal cords are hitting together at a certain speed, or rather her lips are hitting together at a certain speed, that is ultimately what makes pitch. Okay, I say all this because it's important to understand in terms of understanding damage in the voice. When our vocal cords flap apart, they slap back together. Now, at home, you should try this. If you're listening to this, I'm going to play an A on the piano so you can hear an A. And I just want you to sing it for me. I want you to sing it exactly where I am, okay? So here's a note. Just go, whoo. Now, what just happened is that your vocal cords peeled apart and slap back together, yes, 440 times per second. They just slap together 440 times per second. That's a lot of times per second, right? And that's how you make the sound that you make. What happens is that as the vocal cords slow down, you can actually start to hear those flaps, right? So listen to this. Right up here, it's so fast that the human ear can't perceive the space between them because it's so fast. But listen to what happens as I go lower in pitch. The lower I go in pitch, the slower those slaps become, right? The higher I go in pitch, the faster they become, yeah? So listen to this. You'll actually be able to hear it in rumble coordination as we go lower. So listen to this. You can start to hear it a little bit. And now you can hear it. I'll go even lower. You hear that? And that's the vocal cords going. And you guys can hear them literally popping. Yeah. All I've done is I've slowed down the speed of my vocal cords slapping together. Therefore, changing the frequency or pitch that I have. So the slower I can make them go, the lower the frequency I have. Now, there's a line for that in singing where it no longer sounds like what people would call a tone, but it still is a pitch or frequency, just to be clear. So that's what happens when I make sound, yeah? I have air come up from the lungs, I peel apart the vocal cords, and I slap them together. That's how we make sound, just like a lip trill, yeah? But we do it so fast. Now keep in mind, the louder I do this, the further apart they fly and the harder they hit. This is actually how I make a louder sound, is my vocal cords are actually hitting together harder. And when they hit together harder, just like taking your hands, you can try this at home. you can hit your hands together just like this, real nice and easy, then hit them together harder. You'll notice, even in my hands, yeah, this is great. Alex, could you start that again? Really nice and easy. And then can you make it louder? Everyone watch the width of her hands. Go. Great. So generally what happens is that as we get louder, what you'll notice happen to Alex's hands is it actually went to get louder. Her hand splayed out further so it could hit harder together. And this is what happens is that the air blows it out and they slam back together. An important facet of understanding damage. So we've got two things. You now understand how we make sound, and then two, how volume works. Yeah? Okay. So I want to talk about no sound first. Alex, could you show us would you mind pulling up, we got a slide for you all of the larynx. Can you show us that slide? And so what we're seeing here in this slide, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, what we're seeing here is we're seeing the epiglottis on the top. So the version of the larynx that you're seeing right now is actually backwards. So if you made, again, an incision down my body here, and you this time take off the back of my head, this is where we're looking at the larynx from this way. That little flap that you guys see is what's called the epiglottis. It's that thing, if you stuck your finger all the way back in your throat, it's not the dangly thing at the top. It's this little kind of curved like potato chip that sits up behind your tongue. And so if you slide your finger down your tongue, you'll actually feel it, and it gags a lot of people. That's your epiglottis. What it does is when you swallow, your larynx rises and it shuts over your larynx. It's the same thing that people use when they make sounds like this. Hi, everybody. This is your epiglottis. It's really cool. Or what you hear Christina Aguilera use when, or Louis Armstrong, acid trees. What he's doing is he's closing his epiglottis. That flap that you see, he's closing that over his larynx, and it creates that sound. Yeah? So that's the epiglottis. Below it, you're going to see two indentions, okay? So remember, what's happening is that what we're looking at is we're seeing the vocal cords cut in half on their vertical line. They actually shut all the way over the windpipe as so, but we're getting them cut in half, and so we're seeing them from this direction, yeah? So in this shot, you're looking at them from the back. What you're first going to see is you're going to see something that says the vestibular. Oh, where's my mind going now? These are called the false folds. There's a set of tissues that indents above the true folds, which are a little bit thicker. You'll see those. They're on the bottom. There's two sets. There's called the false folds and the true folds. We're not going to talk about the false folds just yet. We're going to talk about the true folds. The true folds now, what happens is that when you can make no sound, what has generally occurred is that you no longer can phonate, or the concept of phonation is allowing the air to go through the vocal cords and the vocal cords slapping together and vibrating, making sound. Well, if the vocal cords are swollen or very thick, it is very hard for them. They kind of barely maybe slap or may not move at all. So what'll happen, instead of doing this thing where they slap together, they'll just go and they just let air out, right? You guys can try this at home with your lips. If you go, when they stop bubbling like that, yeah, you'll feel when they stop bubbling. Try it again, Alex. That was great. You guys notice that Alex's lips start making, it makes that sound, and then suddenly it stops because the lips are no longer slapping together, right? Because now all that's passing through is air. And this is a problem because we're not whistles. We don't make sound by whistling through our vocal cords, contrary to popular belief of the concept of whistle coordination. The vocal cords are still slapping together just really fast. So that's what happens to us, is when I can't make sound, my vocal cords either have some form of swelling or there's something in the way of allowing my vocal cords to actually come together, and something's getting in the way. So that's a tell. It can be a tell if you're making no sound and you go on talking and things like this. This is definitely a sign of something. You definitely have swelling for sure. In that case, it's possible that you may have some insane tension that you're dealing with in your larynx that could be causing that. That's very rare. It's more than likely that you're dealing with some form of swelling in your vocal cords. So that's no sound. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, is there a length of time that no sound goes from maybe like you're sick and you have laryngitis into like vocal damage area?
Great question. The goal would be to get the swelling down as quickly as possible. That's a great question, Alex. Thanks for asking that. the goal would be to get the swelling down as quickly as possible. Swelling impedes function, because it's kind of like some of you may remember the movie called The Christmas Story. If you haven't, you can look it up. And there's a scene with a kid named Ralphie, where Ralphie's mom, God, we got to find the clip to that and like post that in the show. That would be brilliant. We should add that. That's great. We're gonna add a link to this. It's fun. There's a moment where Ralphie comes out, and Ralphie, his mom has gotten him dressed and ready for the winter to go outside because he's got to walk to school. Olden days, right? So he's getting ready to walk to school, and she puts him in this thing. He walks outside, and he can't barely move because he's like padded with all this thick jacket wear and pants, and he can barely move. And so there's a point where he falls over and he can't get up, so his brother has to pick him up, And so this is very similar to what happens when we incur swelling. It's very difficult. Our mobility is lowered, and so swelling can become a difficult thing. So the goal would be to first get the swelling down as quickly as possible. In terms of sustaining swelling should only happen for a brief period of time while there's infection or there's some form of damage, but even after that, it will tend to drop off fairly quickly. So if you have it for more than a week, I would definitely go see someone to see what's going on, because it will spike up. You might lose your voice if you're sick. If you have a virus or something like that, and you're sick, you might lose your voice for a day. And by lose your voice, I mean you can't make sound. That's what I mean. I'm not talking about hoarseness. I'm talking about no production of sound. Yeah, just to be very clear on that. And for everyone out there who's afraid of the term laryngitis, let me explain what that means just for a second. Laryngitis, all it means is swelling of vocal cords or the larynx. That's all that means. Yeah, swelling. It doesn't speak to an actual cause, and it's not really a disease, if you will. It's more of a state of your larynx, much like bronchitis, laryngitis, sinusitis. What they mean is swelling of the tissues in that region.
Uveitis.
Uveitis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. One voice site. No. I almost had it. But yeah, that's all that means. Is it simply means that the larynx is swollen, or the vocal cords are swollen. They call that laryngitis. And there's many, 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 many different reasons for that. Viruses, bacteria, damage, etc. Weird things that go on in the body. Yeah, and that's what laryngitis means. So when you hear the term laryngitis, if someone has given you that information, don't be scared. Just know that it means that there's swelling going on, and your goal is to get that swelling down as quickly as possible. Yeah?
Cool.
Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yes, totally.
Yeah. Moving on to the next one, which is, it is hard to sing what you used to be able to sing. Okay, so this kind of stacks on the no sound a little bit. When you find that it's harder to sing something than it used to be, and let me clarify this. This is for somebody who has been singing continuously. They're professional. They're singing. Maybe they're doing 8 shows a week, or they're someone who's in rehearsals and they're using their voice. And what they start to realize is that, this isn't very easy to sing. This is hard to sing right now. Not in a way that they're doing anything different. It just feels harder to sing. It's harder to sustain weight. It's harder to get louder. I feel like I have to get louder. I feel like I have to increase my intensity more, or go to heavier weight just to get sound to happen. If you find that you're someone who often has a lot of air before you create sound, you go, if you feel like you're experiencing something like that, more than likely there's an obstruction in between the vocal cords. So if we look at this now from above, Alex, could you pull up now the vocal cord chart? So this is the vocal cords. Yeah. So now what you guys are looking at, you're looking at the vocal cords. This is viewed from above, okay? And what's happening is where the point is, the top of that A, if you will, where the vocal cords meet, that's actually at the front of your larynx. That bump, females, you probably don't notice that for a lot of you, but if you're near around a male, you can see a protrusion, often referred to as, people commonly call it the Adam's apple. I call it Eve's peanut as well. Which is fun. So that point, or what's called the thyroid cartilage, behind that is where the vocal folds sit. And that V touches, or that A, the pinnacle of that A touches at the back of that. Yeah. And so when you're looking down the throat, what you're actually doing in this shot is the tongue, if this gives you guys some perspective, the tongue is actually about it's about maybe 2 inches above that in the mouth and going at the top of that image. Yeah, is where the tongue is. Yeah. So this is where we're looking down. So now we're looking down at the vocal folds. Now, remember what I said about the vocal cords when we make sound. The vocal cords have to be able to shut to resist air. They have to be able to shut to resist air. If they cannot shut to resist air, they're just going to blow air out. So you're just going to get a well, what you're seeing here on this image could be many different things. This could be what's called a vocal nodule. Could be a polyp. Could be a cyst. But in this case, it's drawn out as a nodule. A nodule is a bump. I guess all these you really call nodules. They're all different types of nodules. But this one, what it does is it puts a bump in the middle of the vocal cords and then makes it difficult for them to fully shut. So if you have if you have recently washed your hands, everyone, wash your hands. Do this for me. Take your lips and make the bubble. Now, take your pinky and just put it right in the middle, right in the center of your mouth, and now try and bubble again. Very hard to do, right?
Oh.
And this is what happens when people have a fully developed nodule or a polyp or a cyst. All those things can really make it difficult to shut the vocal cords. Now, in most cases, they're small. They're very, very small. So what people end up doing is if you can get yourself to bubble again, what you end up doing, why it's harder, is now, as I said, there's an obstruction. So what I end up doing is I try and smash my lips together really hard. And I still get the bubble to happen, right? But I'm having to really squeeze my vocal cords to compensate for that obstruction, yeah? And so this is when, if you feel that you've been singing stuff and suddenly it's actually more difficult than it used to be, but you're someone who's very aware of your voice, that's a time when you should connect with someone. And it's something that kind of happens. Polyps and cysts can kind of happen randomly. Nodules are a little less random. Polyps and cysts can happen randomly, I should say. Some can develop over time, but sometimes it can be rough. You can be out singing one show and then the next day, I have a polyp now, or I've developed a polyp, or I have a cyst that has occurred. Those are things that are I would say a little more unlucky versus nodules, which often occur from what we'll talk about here in a second. But the causes for them scientifically are for misuse or overuse. Those are super vague terms. If you didn't already realize that, they're very vague. And I'm going to dig into that here in just a moment. But that's why it can be more difficult for you to make sound. And it's not like, oh, well, I haven't sung in 5 weeks and I'm coming back and this song's so hard for me to sing. That's because you're out of shape. But if you're finding that it's hard to make sound, it's more difficult, it's more laborious to make sound, then you should definitely take a look at that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because that can be something more serious.
Yeah. I also want to point out that it's not just if you're singing consistently, but it's also the types of songs and the type of weight you're utilizing. If you've been singing lightweight really consistently, and then you go to do a heavyweight, you're like, that feels really hard. You're also out of shape for that type of.
Great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah. From way of singing, from weight to weight. Yeah, if you default in a heavyweight and now you're gonna go sing lightweight, like it's so hard. Like Alex said, that's about conditioning and stamina versus something's happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that you need to be concerned about.
Cool.
Great point. Let's talk about random voice cracks. So with random voice cracks, are we back on us, mm-hmm. Alex? Okay. Yeah, great. So for random voice cracks, this kind of goes back to the no sound. If you have swelling in the larynx can swell and the vocal cords can swell, or they can not swell at the same time. You could just have the vocal cords. You could just have the larynx. When that happens, you'll have random things occur like random voice cracks. You might be going through and you're just going, and you cannot hold it, which you normally could hold. If you find that your voice is basically failing, that is a sign that there is some form of swelling. It doesn't necessarily mean there's damage, but there could be swelling, and that's something to be very, very aware of and start getting taken care of as quickly as possible before it could possibly turn in to damage. And I'm going to explain that in just a minute as to why or how that could occur. The next one is loss of range. When there is swelling present, there is often loss of range, because much like Ralphie in A Christmas Story, he loses all his mobility. So same thing here. Your larynx has to be able to maneuver into different positions, or the coordinations as we talk about, in order to allow you to sing different pitches. And if it cannot do that, then you're not going to sing those pitches. It's as simple as that. So that can be very difficult. So if your larynx swells up, and this is something, a good tell, if you're trying to figure out what kind of swelling you have, a good tell is this. If you find that you're breathy, or you're much breathier than normal, then it's likely that you have vocal cord swelling. And you find that heavyweight is really easy for you, it's likely that your vocal cords are swollen. The reason I say heavyweight's really easy for you is that they're already so swollen that when you go to squeeze them together, they're already squeezing together very quickly. So it takes very little effort. But you won't feel like you can get very loud when your vocal cords are swollen. It's hard for them because they're not as malleable as normal, so they don't hit as well. If it's your larynx that's swollen, you will find that, unlike vocal cord swelling, where you can still sing stuff, with laryngeal swelling, it is really difficult to maneuver your voice. Your voice suddenly becomes really sluggish. It becomes really inaccurate. A pitch that you could normally hit really easily now is just like, forget it. You're like, let's say you're trying to go, what is it? When you believe, oh, wait a minute. I think it's right. When you believe in things. If you try and go there, you can try saying, when you believe in things. Why does that sound so? Oh, there it is. I can't find the thing. I can't remember. But superstition. When you're trying to sing, you go, when you believe in things. If you can normally hit that, and you suddenly go, when you believe, when you believe, when you believe. What's happening is your larynx ability has been deadened, as it were, or lowered because of the swelling, and so its ability to maneuver is been hit, we can say. So your accuracy is much lower. So if you find that you're singing and your pitch accuracy is really bad suddenly, it's likely that you have laryngeal swelling. You can have both at the same time too. Again, the game is to get that swelling down as quickly as possible. Loss of volume. The last one, which is loss of volume. When there is swelling, there is loss of volume often and almost always. If you find that you just can't get loud, it's more than likely that you have, you're just dealing with swelling. It's not anything special, it's just swelling. Now, let me put these together. Swelling. When you have swelling going on, this is a very vulnerable state that your voice is in when you have swelling. A lot of us are like, it's fine, I'm just going to push through. Come on, boys, bam, just sing, just be good, right? Why that can be really dangerous is it's the same as having like a bum knee, right? Let's say your knee just got hit, or you guys have probably felt this before. If you've ever gotten a Charlie horse on an arm, or someone hit your leg, your quad for some reason, you go to move that, it's actually very painful, and it's likely that there's swelling in the muscle at that point. Going to use that or try and make that function will only cause greater damage and create more swelling. So what you'll find is that if you are dealing with any type of swelling and you go to sing, one of the things you'll find is that you'll have a very limited amount of time to do your singing. Your voice will start to give out, and it'll start to give out very quickly because everything is just starting to blow up like a balloon because you're starting to use it. If you've ever had a knee injury, an elbow, a shoulder injury, if you start using it, it just starts blowing up. And instead of pain, because you don't really feel pain in there, it just blows up to the point where it's just too hard to use it. Or you just stop making sound entirely. So you're like doing things like this, and you have no sound anymore because of the swelling, which is a bad deal. You want to stay away from that as much as possible. Now, if you're sick and you get a virus or a bacterial infection, there's nothing you can do about it. But in terms of use, be very aware, be very cautious about using your voice when your vocal cords are swelling, your larynx is swollen. Be very, very careful with that. So let's talk about what it means to have misuse or overuse. People talk about why. Oh yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead.
you hit on raspiness, hoarseness. Did I miss that?
Oh, no, you didn't. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah.
I don't know why I literally like skipped over that. Thank you. Raspiness or hoarseness. Thanks, Alex. With raspiness or hoarseness, what's happening is similar to what was happening before when we make no sound. These all kind of fall in the same category: no sound, loss of range, loss of volume, raspiness, hoarseness, random voice crack. They all fall in the same category of really laryngeal or vocal cord swelling. What happens with raspiness or hoarseness is like, if I were just talking, because some of you have probably experienced this recently with all the stuff that's been going around in the countries, is you might finally wake up one morning and your voice, like you're in a very lightweight, but you're also just leaking a ton of air. Yeah. That raspiness comes from generally swollen vocal cords. When the vocal cords are swollen, they'll tend to leak a little bit more than usual. And so you'll feel that. So again, this falls under the swelling vocal cords. Yeah. But I want to be clear that just because you have swelling doesn't necessarily mean that you have damage yet. Yeah. Just want to be clear. So it can be on the way. It is the same road in many cases. But that's something to be very, very aware of. And get that down as quickly as possible and get everything back to a neutral state in your body as quickly as you can. I want to talk about why damage occurs in the conventional world, and why people say that. And Alex, you have had some experience with this in your past when you were younger.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah.
And then we can talk a little more about misuse and overuse.
Yeah, so I was 12 or 13 and I got diagnosed with nodules. I had taken voice lessons since I was like 9, but it was very much like fun voice lessons. I don't think it was serious or technique based. And I was a very like loud, heavyweight singer as a kid. I remember specifically my entryway had like really, really tall ceilings, and I would stand there when no one was home, and I would sing as loud as I possibly could. To the point where like the entire room and I was shaking. I was like, I'm a witch. I'm so powerful. And I think that's what led to my vocal damage, because I was never one to pull a coordination. I don't think I never had range issues. I think it was really volume based for me. So yeah, I went on vocal rest. I think it was like 2 months. And yeah.
That's real. And thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And everyone know that it's, again, this is partially why we're doing this, is to break some of the shame around it and the fear, because it does happen. Look, for a lot of the people who are probably listening to this and watching this, you have some form of aspiration in the world of voice, or using your voice. Whether you're a sportscaster, or you're a Broadway singer, or you're a performer in high school, you're working on trying to hone your voice and get to that higher level, if you will, right? Or level up, however you see that. But using your voice far more than the average person, and so because of that, without knowledge and without other things to aid you through that, it's possible that you can get into a position where you have no idea and you run into damage. And that's important to be aware of, and not feel horrible about, because get the help. I feel like we need like a voice hotline now. When I say that, like, oh man, I just feel like we should have like 1-800-VOICE damage.com. Yeah. One voice coach is standing by. No, that's not funny, but it's great. So, where am I? So, use and misuse and overuse. So let's talk about those, because they're very vague. And when you read about this, people say, you'll look at it, I'm like, how did I get voice damage? How did I get this cyst? How did I get this polyp? How did I get this nodule? Oh my gosh. So let's assume now that you've arrived at nodule, cyst, polyp, right? Let's assume that you've arrived there now, yeah. Or a hemorrhage, Let's assume that you've gotten there. All not fun things for a vocalist, someone who uses their voice a lot, or a voice professional. Now that you're there, let's talk about how you got there, and what the world sees as a way that you might have arrived there. Let's talk about misuse, okay? Misuse. What does that mean? No one really knows, right? How awesome. And this was frustrating for me because growing up, as many of you know my story, I would lose my voice after singing for 20 to 40 minutes and not just go a little hoarse, but I could not produce sound. So if that tells you anything, it's likely that I had swelling often. It's likely that I had some form of nodule or something like that I developed that made it very difficult for me to approximate my vocal cords, and so I'd try even harder. I was a coordination forcer. Like it was just everything that I could do to completely ruin my chances for doing well with my voice. I did. And so for me, it was very confusing as to why things would happen with my voice. You know, what I was told is that, that's just the way you are. You just have a small voice. Some people just have vocal cords of steel. It's amazing. I was like, wow, I wish I could do that. I wish I had vocal cords of steel. They're so lucky. I would have friends, which many of you probably experienced this with some of your friends, or you are that friend. You can go and scream and yell all night and you're totally fine. And another friend might do that, another person might do that, and they're not all right. Their voice is gone, like just garbage the next day. And that was me. If I hung out and sung with friends at a night or something like that, next day, gone. Another friend of mine I was really close to, he would go and sing and yell and scream and laugh and totally fine. Voice totally fine. Me, I was like, I would try and not laugh as loud because it would just destroy me, or I would try not to sing as hard. It was horrible, really frustrating. And so the things I learned is that I was misusing my voice, or I was overusing my voice. But what was I doing? How was I misusing it? How was I overusing it? How come he can yell and scream all night and I can yell and scream for 20 minutes and my voice is gone? What's the difference, right? I don't understand. And how come that person can, this teacher at a school can speak for 8 hours and this teacher can only speak for 30 minutes? What's the difference, right? And so this is where we live in the world of singing right now, is that people then start trying to grab onto ideas or thoughts that might be the cause for that. So a couple things that people say is they may say, well, you just don't have a big voice, like I said before, so you need to stop trying to make your voice so big. You're a small person, so you need to not try and make your voice, what it would be for a big person. Now, everyone, I think we all know that we have people in our lives who are smaller in stature and smaller in size, and they're very loud, and their voices are totally fine. And then we have people who are very, very big in stature and large in stature, and they do not have very big voices, right? And so I think that's something that right off the bat, when we just look at it like that, we can just wipe that off the table, right? Mm-hmm. I hope that's easy. And the other one is, I think when people look at this, they say, you're just speaking too low. And some of you have probably heard this before. Speaking too low on some of this stuff. Oh, and by the way, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, if you're listening to this and you're not sure about what we're talking about in terms of coordinations and weight and stuff like that, if those are terms that are kind of like, what is that? Alex, we're gonna add this into the notes here in the description for a link to show 30, I believe it was, that's titled Chest, Head, and Mix, and something you should go take a look at so you can understand the terms that we use in the world of one voice, better understand more of what we're talking about here. In terms of those ideas and saying, well, you're speaking too low, well, then how come it's fine for that person to speak low? And why is it not okay for me to speak low? All of these are ideas or hopes of understanding how we can help people in the conventional world to not hurt their voices. You're hurting your voice because you're belting. That's why you're hurting your voice. Let me throw out an idea to you all that might blow your mind. Voice damage and voice injury occur just as much in the classical world as it does in the contemporary popular music world. Let me say that again. voice damage and injury occurs just as much in the traditional or classical opera singing world as it does in the contemporary popular singing world. People like to put classical music on a pedestal, and it's just as much of a stress on the voice as singing a musical theater show and belting 8 shows a week. They're both highly strenuous on the voice. So let's get into the potential of understanding why these things occur, because this is the world that we live in. And so I want to share this. Alex, is it okay if I talk about our world and how we look at that?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll close here for tonight. When we were talking about this stuff from the vantage point of one voice, when you start to look at it and you start to think about misuse, overuse, there's a few things to understand about it. And we've now worked with several clients who had the best vocal health they'd ever had, the best technical ability they'd ever had. And while working with them, they developed a pre-nodule, or they developed a polyp or a cyst. Oh my gosh. Oh no. What's happening? Oh no. And I remember the first time this happened, and I was like mortified. I was terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And I'm thinking to myself, nothing makes sense. Like, they're producing sound like they've never produced it before. It's so clear. It's effortless. Like they're producing sound in a beautiful way. They're hitting all the notes they could never hit before. They're doing it in a way that is easy and pleasing and da 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 da. I'm like, none of this makes sense. And there's some interesting things that start to make sense when you start to look at it through this lens. First thing I had to check is I had to check to make sure that our clients weren't forcing a coordination. That's number one. Don't force coordinations. If you're forcing a coordination, the game, remember everyone, is not about forcing a coordination to sing higher. It's about moving into the next coordination and then developing it. And then you'll have a whole extra octave each time you move into another coordination, which is amazing. The second thing is volume. Volume is huge. Volume is so much bigger. And you heard the key word that Alex said. She said she stood in her entryway and just went for the heavens, and as loud as she could, loud as she could, loud as she could. Mm-hmm. Important to recognize that, people. When you are the conventional term belting, right? Or you'd be singing heavyweight loud in the one voice world. That is high stress. That's one of the highest stresses you can put on your voice. Any high volume is a high stress on your voice. Because, like we said in the very beginning, when I was talking about the vocal cords, what happens is they whip apart further and they hit together harder. Well, the harder they hit, if they're not conditioned for that or ready for that, and you haven't worked up to that, you're not going to be sitting in a pretty world soon, because your vocal cords are going to swell. But because we don't feel a lot, we think, it's fine. I'll push through it. So we do. And our vocal cords now are swollen, and now we're just flying them apart and hitting them as hard as we can, right? Mm-hmm. You can imagine how that unfolds. And this is where our body starts to create a way. Nodules are a thought that the body, as it hits together there, the body starts to create a calloused form in the tissue there, starts to try and callus the tissue. This is why nodules can be so detrimental to most singers, because not only do they impede your sound production, but some of the only ways to get rid of them is through vocal arrest or surgery, basically making no sound, which is really hard, because that means that your voice is going to atrophy. And it means when you start over again, you're gonna have to like really start lifting those you start working out again, lifting those voice weights, as it were, all over again, which can be really arduous. Mm-hmm. But it's totally possible. I would say last resort, always, side note, last resort after multiple opinions is surgery. Always last resort, people. Okay, I'll also say the same thing. Well, I'll save that for next time. I want to talk about things you should do, but I can't. Yeah. So we're going to save that for our next time. Mm-hmm. And last thing I'll say in terms of misuse and overuse is that from the lens of one voice, when I was talking about those people, what had happened to them is that those people that I was talking about that we encountered in our World of One Voice, that we had trained and built their voices up and their voices doing great, suddenly they're having pre-nodules. What's going on? I don't understand. What had happened is these people were either had bad allergies for a long period of time, or they'd been consistently sick over the course of like 5 to 6 months. Well, what I started to realize when I started putting all the pieces together is I thought, oh my goodness, here it is. Here it is. When you have bad allergies, what happens is you have postnasal drip, right? Which creates swelling on the vocal cords. But because you don't feel it that much, and it's just a little bit of swelling, it's not huge aggravation, it's just slight aggravation, you keep singing. And if you're a voice professional, you keep singing, right? So what happens? You're singing over and over on bum vocal cords, yeah? Or vocal cords that are swollen now. And they don't like to be slapped together when they're swollen. They don't love that feeling, right? So this was what we started to realize. I started to realize, oh my gosh. And it was 2 different sets. One person had really bad allergies that they needed to learn how to get under control. And the other person had been consistently sick over and over and over and over the course of 5 months. Once I realized, I thought, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense. So we checked all the boxes for One Voice. We said, all right, not forcing coordination? No. Freedom? Great. They're easing into volume? Awesome. And so once they started getting their allergies under control, they went on vocal rest, got their allergies under control, came back to singing, worked out just like normal, but now they had a plan for taking care of their allergies. Voice, back to normal, amazing, great, awesome. Never had that problem again. Same thing with the person who was sick over and over and over. They had to figure out how to get their immune system boosted and get all that stuff under control so they could be healthy again and not sing on bum vocal cords. It would be no different if that virus, as it were, could go and inflame your knee and you were a dancer. You keep dancing on it, you're just going to hurt it more, right? But because we lack a lot of sensation or feeling in here, a slight bit of swelling can be difficult to detect. Yeah. So I say that to everyone. 2 big ones: volume, keep that in mind, not forcing coordinations, and then checking with certain ailments or illnesses or allergies. Those are big ones. And so those all fall into the world of misuse. Yeah.
Right.
And overuse. Amazing. That was so exciting. I can't wait to talk about what to do next. And I just want to do it, but we're gonna save it.
I literally feel like you have a metaphorical leash on right now, and you're just
I do.
Pull the tree over.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to get into more of this for the next 2 weeks. Next week is, what do you do about it? What doctors do you see? How do you deal with it if it's determined that you do have vocal damage? And week 3 is, how do you prevent it, which we'll get into a lot more of, talking about volume and getting allergies and stuff under control. But yes, part 2 next week, Wednesday, here on YouTube, 6:30 p.m. CT. Michael and I will be here to continue and to dive into what next steps, what to do about it if you figure out you have vocal damage. Awesome. Michael, thank you so much.
Thanks.
See you guys next week.